live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. We've had some technical problems today that have meant it was difficult to invite people in, but guess what? Here we are, and we've got this going on. So we're going to talk about taboos today. This is a super interesting topic, and I think it's probably going to range all over the place. But I did go in and do a little bit of research to start the day off because I wanted to get into, I wanted to start with the origins of the word, and it comes from Tongan, taboo, and then in Maori it's T-A-P-U, taboo. So it's a Polynesian practice, and basically refers to things that you can't talk about or can't do because they are too sacred. Yeah. So so we have actually, you know, obviously this term is out in the world now, so it's been applied to a lot more things than just the original practices that that lay behind the term in Tonga and in the Maori communities. Captain James Cook visited Tonga in 1771, and then thereafter the word was introduced to the English language. So yeah, so if you, this is an interesting little definition. It says it includes, it's a prohibition of some kind that includes the idea that breach or defiance will be followed by some kind of trouble to the offender, such as lack of success in hunting or fishing, sickness, miscarriage, or death. And sometimes you can mitigate that by making up for it by, you know, through cleansing or that kind of thing, and sometimes you can't. But yeah, I mean, it includes everything from really sort of dire life events, death, birth, rites of passage, or just don't pick fruit in this season. So it's a sort of a prohibition idea, okay, often associated with sacredness.
Juliet, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, absolutely.
Are we going to spend this hour talking about the word in the context of the Polynesian origins, or are we going to talk about it in the context of the way we normally use it in
We are going to talk about it in the way we normally use it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to go back there because I hadn't gone back there. We've spoken about taboos on a previous occasion, but we did not go back there, and I thought that would be an interesting place to start because obviously the word is out in the world now, and usage causes change over time, and it's now used across a lot of contexts, far more than it was originally.
I want to de-exoticize the word for a moment, if I may.
Absolutely.
So I noticed that when non-Polynesians talk about this, it gains the sort of, oh, look at what those people do trappings that sort of erase the ways in which Western culture has similar ideas of sort of sacredness and prescription and mitigation and consequence. Mm-hmm. And I think of this often when we talk about don't speak ill of the dead.
Yeah.
That is one of our cultural taboos. It's one that's being more and more breached now, but traditionally, you know, that definitely counts as a cultural taboo we have. We don't use it in that term. It's just normalized.
Right.
It's an aphorism, but you know.
If I might interject, there's another one, which is don't take the Lord's name in vain, for example.
That one is a specific religious injunction, though.
Yeah, but I think it's
a commandment.
More culturally widespread than that.
I think it crosses multiple religions.
No, that's because in English we normalize the ways in which Jewishness and Christianity are imbued with this idea that taking the Lord's name in vain is a principle that's not culturally, that's not a cultural universal.
Okay, I'm not trying to say that it is.
So,
In fact, I think
I'm not saying you did. I'm
not a
saying
person
Brian
who
just did.
believes in
Well, no,
cultural
I,
universals
I'm
generally.
sorry.
So
I wasn't saying that it was universal either. I was just saying that it's not just Christian, Jewish. Like the I don't want to cause any problems, but like the prophet, you know, like in Muslim, you know, that's
those are related. I mean, they're definitely related. It is a widespread practice, though.
But here's the question: what constitutes taking the Lord's name in vain?
Well, oh gee,
Using it
I
as a
don't
swear
want to
word?
get into that in detail because I want to keep this discussion broader than
That's a whole topic of itself.
yeah. I think we could go there for hours.
So no, the thing I wanted to say was that there's things that are specifically religious, and this thing about blasphemy is specifically religious. But this thing about not speaking ill of the dead is not specifically religious.
Yeah.
I mean, and the litmus test I use for that is, will an atheist bristle at this rule or not?
Okay.
Well, as an atheist, I speak ill of the dead on a fairly regular basis, but
well,
I'm not sure that's
right. But I mean, we don't have to have it be universal in order for it to be valid as a taboo.
Right. But the reason I wanted to talk about it as a taboo was that I think we exceptionalize the Polynesian taboos as if they are inexplicable and exotic. And I think that the topic of this hour, I hoped, was that we were going to talk about how very pervasive prescriptions like that are, and how the people within that culture might not even see them as unusual. They're just the way the world is supposed to be organized.
Yeah, sure. And there's another one, I think, which is don't talk about how people make their money or how much money they make.
That's very much a cultural variable.
Yes.
Right.
There are cultures in which it's perfectly normal. There are cultures in which you don't ask somebody what they do. That's not the topic of conversation. Whereas in the US, it's the first thing you ask somebody. So what do you do? In France, that you never ask that question. It's not seen as relevant.
Well, it's classist. It keeps people from being able to socialize across socioeconomic strata.
It also implies that classism, and that implies that what you do, that you do something to justify your existence.
Okay, yeah.
It's also it means that it devalues people who don't have a what do you do that is considered a do. And so, yeah, this is one of those things that we take for granted as what kinds of things do you ask? And so I've noticed that as genre creators, the things that we have aliens or far future people doing betrays our own cultural context and the things we don't recognize them within ourselves as our assumptions and taboos. So, go to certain countries and the first thing they'll ask you is, how much do you make? And as an American, I realize how American acculturated I am in those moments, because I sort of go, what? I'm not prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, there is that. It's this. I think you're right in identifying that reaction, that's sort of visceral. What? Oh, wait, no, you're not supposed to do that kind of thing.
And I think that visceral reaction is a definition of a taboo.
Yeah.
It's that thing that's so deep-seated that, the separation of toileting and eating and what you do and what implements you use. These are things that just, and you don't talk about it. If you ever try to go educate somebody from a completely different cultural context, what you do in the bathroom is one of those taboos that's really difficult to find rules for.
Yeah.
And so when you have somebody who really wants these rules written down, it gets really difficult to write this out and to go, well, okay, so first the thing you do is you unbuckle your, and it's just this long thing. But, and then after, that's a very taboo thing. And yet, yesterday I was watching a TED Talk about open air toilets. No, there was something. It was about the practice of defecating outdoors. And, you know, that's just, it was a topic I watched with some amount of horror, considering that like Brian, I have a certain sense of, oh, well, you know, I'll talk you a little dead. What, you try to stop me. So.
Yeah. In fact, I was actually noticing, and I'm not going to localize this to a person, but that, for example, our strict taboos about not talking about certain regions of the body are actually quite problematic when it comes to getting the right sort of medical care for certain people.
Oh, yeah.
Because even the doctor doesn't want to talk to you about your butt. Right? Like, we all feel so deeply uncomfortable about it that that in fact it makes these very necessary conversations very difficult.
Well, there are different degrees of punishment or repercussions for taboos, right? I mean, you know, talking about how much you make in the U.S., I think, you know, it happens without, you know, as much consequence. And then I think there's some taboos that are more serious, I think. I was thinking about this before we came into this, like, I don't even know if they are considered like taboo, or just, you know, like incest and bestiality and things of like that nature, which are like, those are like big red flag things. And I wonder if do those fit into the area of taboo? And
yeah, they do.
So then you've got a spectrum between like bestiality and men talking to other men in the restroom. I mean, they're just this huge gap.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a term that's applied to. It's effectively applied to a lot of different things. Some quite dramatic, and others less so. You know.
Well, it's interesting to look at what things end up being on the other side of that boundary, because you know, men not talking to men in the bathroom. It's not just the bathroom. I mean, the bathroom is a major place, but men aren't supposed to talk to men about emotions. They're supposed to talk to women about emotions.
Yeah, yeah.
The particular thing about bathrooms for men is that it's a place where there are only men, and yet there are only men that they probably don't know. You don't know any of the other men in the bathroom. We are not socialized to converse in those kind of circumstances.
Well, that's interesting. Because maybe, but maybe not.
Well, we do socialize, but we socialize about things that we are sharing an experience of. So if you're in a bar and you're watching the sports game up on the big screen behind the bar, you can turn to another guy and talk about that. If you're in the restroom, there's only one thing you can turn to the other guy and talk about, and you don't talk about that thing.
Yeah, but I've seen two guys like walking together, talking about business or sports or whatever, going towards the bathroom. They cross the barrier into the bathroom, and then they go silent. They do their business, they finish, wash up, leave, and then they resume talking again. It's like that space is just not for communication. I have experienced
that where there are other people in the bathroom, but where there's nobody else, I've experienced people carry on talking. So it kind of,
sure.
I think it may relate to the dangers of like
there might be some nuances here.
There's a different kind of space that you're in when you're in the actual restroom area than when you're just walking down a corridor. Even though other people may be present in the corridor, there's a different socialization of the space and how that socialization operates than there is in the bathroom. Bathrooms have very, very, very particular socialization rules that do not apply pretty much anywhere else that I can think of.
What I find interesting
and yes, it's weird.
Well, what I find interesting about the male bathroom rules is that if I go online right now, I can find 50 different articles about the male bathroom rule. And so we're allowed to talk about it. We're allowed to talk about how men aren't allowed to talk.
We're totally allowed to talk about it as long as we're not in the bathroom talking about it. That's the place we can't do it.
Really funny because you don't find as many articles about women talking in the bathroom.
Because women do talk in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why women go to the bathroom in pairs. And all the excuses that are given are not quite right.
Yeah.
We can talk about things without having men tell us not to talk about it. We can talk about things without worrying about what the men will think or say or do in response to what we're talking about. It's a safe space.
Yes.
Well, we also go to the bathroom in pairs to make sure that it's safe.
That is the other thing about going, that's true.
And yet, you know, it's that thing with, even casually, women can talk to, it's one of the places where women can talk to other women, actually, because you can't run up and tell a stranger that her lipstick is smudged. But if you don't do it in the bathroom, you're a jerk. Mm-hmm. You know, there's that last minute, you've washed your hands, you look up at the mirror above the sink and you do the final check. And if there's something that you can't see, it's very much polite to say, hey, you missed a spot of lipstick.
Yeah.
It's like the male rules are inverted.
And that's interesting. Well, I mean, I think it has to do with the function of the space and what it, like what you're expected to be able to do there. I don't know.
So the other thing that's interesting in that is also the two things that are always a consideration for men's behavior in the West, one of which is the ways that men are not allowed to receive emotional labor from men. Mm. And the other is the sort of combination of misogyny and homophobia that's all part of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why gayness was considered, I want to put that in past tense very strongly, such a thing was that it forced a thing out into the open that was taboo, which was discussing sex.
Yeah, discussing sex
gender
was always pretty taboo.
So I don't know that it was as much the fact that gay people were doing things, you know, the gayness meant that you were doing things with inappropriate people, so much as that in drawing that distinction, it forced an awareness on both sides.
So you're referring to bringing up like the process of trying to determine whether somebody else shares your orientation causes.
No, just saying that somebody's gay. Just highlighting the fact that somebody is not going to pair up with a woman. A man is not going to pair up with a woman.
So having to draw the distinction between heterosexual and homosexual is a thing that people have to do verbally, so that makes them uncomfortable because it's taboo to talk about sex. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. The drawing the distinction draws attention to a taboo.
Okay.
And it's not even just about a taboo against gayness. It's not just a taboo against gay sexual behavior. It's a taboo against discussing sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the assumption that gayness is all about sex.
Yeah.
So
there is that is an assumption, though. It's not necessarily.
It is. And so this is why I want to talk about how taboos have these very deep layered consequences.
Yeah.
And that they arise because of the all of the interlocking frameworks and assumptions of a culture. Like, don't put ketchup on your ice cream. That's not actually a taboo, but you know, it's about the ways in which we draw lines between certain kinds of foods and other kinds of foods. Because you can put balsamic vinegar on your ice cream.
That still sounds nasty.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, for some people it's gourmet.
Well, it depends on the ice
but like
cream,
on your
actually.
And on the
strawberries,
vinegar.
for instance. Yes. But I mean, balsamic vinegar on strawberries is a gourmet food, right? If you put ketchup on your strawberries, you're going to get thrown out of the dinner party.
But why wouldn't you put balsamic vinegar on your strawberry ice cream?
I think you would.
Yeah. Well, some people would. Anybody who would, Anyway, but so what is the because if you look at what Juliet was saying earlier about if something is taboo and you do it or you talk about it, then your harvest fails or your hunt fails or whatever. So what kinds of punishments do you suffer now? Do you suffer social
ostracizing? I think is the main one. Or just being told off. Right? Ew, don't talk about that. Like, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, so if you have a reputation for bringing up uncomfortable topics at dinner parties, you may find that the consequences that you don't get invited to dinner parties, which sounds relatively trivial until you realize that social connections that lead to business opportunities, for instance, might be happening at dinner parties. So we don't have quite as much divine retribution concept in many ways, but despite Pat Robertson's attempts to try to enforce them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, really, that's what he's saying, is that because we've allowed people to breach taboos, that we are being divinely punished. He really wants to believe in a your crops will fail and the seas will rise and sweep you away. So I don't know that it's as far remote as we'd like.
Yeah. So here's the question. Is it taboo to tell somebody why they are not being invited? To say, you talk about these things and we don't want you here. Is it in the same department as, hey, your lipstick is smudged?
Not in my experience.
No, I think I think that's a general sort of avoidance of discomfort, not a specific taboo. And I think, in fact, taboo and just plain old avoidance are a little different from one another, because taboo has a particular kind of, it's a very specific kind of discomfort. And it's not like, I'm going to piss this person off, right? Kind of, I'm a conflict avoidant kind of person, right? They're not quite the same.
Well, I want to talk about conflict avoidance and conflict and confronting problematic situations as a taboo situation.
Okay, let's do that.
One of the things that, because of the work I do, doing the ongoing coaching of social justice, is that confronting people about having made a socially unjust, having done something socially unjust, having done something racist or ableist, saying those things is considered super taboo, which is why you get the response of, oh my God, you called me a racist. That is a response that means you broached a taboo. You are not supposed to ever call me that.
Yeah.
And that allegedly doing those things is taboo. But in many, many societal groupings, saying that broach has happened, that breach has happened, is more of a taboo than actually performing the breach. And in fact, if you perform that breach, somebody will jump in to excuse you and say, well, they're just ignorant. That's just how they are. It's the context they grew up in. It's not that bad. They don't mean it. A million excuses arise. But if you say, hey, that wasn't okay, unless it's in a context where it's very carefully been allowed, it is very much a disallowed behavior.
Well, I think, and I'm not trying to distract from this, but I think that the regulation of other people's behavior is generally avoided. Would
But
you?
we're happy to regulate other people's behavior when it's somebody saying, you just said something racist.
When it's
we're perfectly happy to regulate those people's behavior. Why are we not happy to regulate the people's behavior
so
who are
it's
doing
all
the
about
racist thing?
who gets regulated and when and how.
Indeed.
And this is how taboos work, right? Because even in the most traditional sense, the more societal power you had, the more things that you were allowed to do. Although there were things you couldn't do if you were at the top echelons, because that would lose you your sacred status.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get the caste system in traditional Hindu society, where, yes, you literally can't touch certain things or do certain things if you're upper caste, because that will drag you down.
Mm.
Right. And at the same time, the people who are the lower castes aren't allowed to do things that the people at the uppermost are required to do. So, for instance, religious observance becomes a big thing, where the people at the lowest castes aren't allowed to perform religious rites.
Right.
But it is very much this, it's a way of designing who does emotional labor for who does physical labor for whom. And so that dinner party discussion issue is part of that same structure.
I think it's also, a, sorry, I'm having trouble putting this into words.
It's all right.
I keep thinking of the distinction between positive and negative politeness, which is not exactly the same. So give me a second here. Negative politeness is the way that you be polite by recognizing somebody else's autonomy, and treating them as though they need to be kind of left alone, backed off from, used fancy flower things with. Positive politeness is speaking to them casually or intimately, and basically making alignment moves with them, where it's the fact that you're standing with them verbally is more important than the fact that they are separate from you and able to do as they wish separately from you. And what you were talking about with, the call out taboo, I think is related to that, because certain cultural groups are looking for opportunities to sort of fly their I am aligned with you flag. And one of the I am aligned with you flags that people like to wave is, for example, a racist or a sexist joke. I mean, I hear stories all the time about men who are concerned about social justice who walk into a room with other men and are immediately being told really horrible jokes because there is this sort of operant assumption that they are going to accept that and find that, it's sort of a we are both in the same group kind of maneuver. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad you came up with that example, because I was initially very confused, because intimacy versus formality is a culturally specific, and Americans are weird because of the ways that we do familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a sort of a bathtub curve of familiarity versus as intimacy versus familiarity as contempt.
Yeah.
In many other cultures, we don't do that quite as much.
Right.
Although there's the whole language of Jim Crow, but yes, I think that the engaging in taboo behaviors as a act of bonding is a common thing.
Yeah.
So here we are in the frat, and in the frat we all tell sexist jokes.
Uh-huh.
And the thing that distinguishes us is we are in an environment where, the telling of these jokes is a symbolic act of how intimate and tied together we are.
Yeah.
And that's I don't want to just say that's a frat thing. That is a thing.
No, but I've heard of it happening in a lot of situations.
Yes.
And I know several people who have been in situations where they've had people make these overtures to them, and they've been very upset because of all the assumptions that were made about, you know, I mean, hey, you look right, so you're obviously okay with this, and when somebody's not okay with it, that's upsetting.
My favorite commentary on that particular practice is, hey, do you know how every racist joke in the world starts? So,
looking around.
it's that knowing who's in the room. It is about making sure that everybody in here is a thing. It's a shibboleth.
So I had a couple of questions, I think.
Yeah.
First is regarding taboo in its origins. Am I right in thinking that taboo is a reflection of a society's history? Like I'm losing examples, but I guess this is the other question. Taboos they generally have a certain purpose, right? To curb behavior around certain topics. And a lot of the examples that we've used have been, we've been kind of tearing them down a little bit. Are there any taboos that we have currently that are positive, that we hold as, yes, we should continue to have this taboo because it promotes a behavior that we want in our society?
Sexualization of children.
Yeah. Anytime you have a taboo like this, a lot of what happens with it, so you kind of have obvious ones and then unspoken ones, right? and often speaking about them, it's like Fight Club. Speaking
right.
about them is also taboo, right? We're not going to talk about the fact that you're not supposed to call out racism when you hear it, We're not going to talk about that because that would admit that it was a thing that we recognized as a parameter, right? And in fact, you get this is, I think, related to this weird argument. I'm going to call it weird because every time I run into it, I think it's weird, where people will say, you're talking about race and therefore you are racist. And it's like, no.
That the only solution to racism is for all of us to treat it like the elephant in the room.
But it's like,
if nobody saw color thing, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, well, it is.
Everyone was purple. Yeah, but they're not. So until that happens,
right,
that's kind of pointless.
You know what? I should try that. I should try asking if they are volunteering for all of us to become the exact same shade of purple.
Yeah.
As opposed to all of us being the colors we are and pretending that we're not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but all pretending that we're white. Yes.
Well, pretty much. I mean, I keep having to tell people, no, I refuse to do this don't see color thing because that's complete malarkey. Because when I go in to go buy clothes, when the assumption is that everybody is a peach-skinned Northern European, I can tell.
Yeah.
Because I look like I need to go to the emergency room when I wear these clothes.
Yeah.
I really literally have people coming up to me going, "Kat, are you feeling okay? You look a little..." And it's because I end up having this ghastly complexion. It looks like I have something wrong with my body.
Yeah, there are colors that
well, I mean,
and maybe there's some overlap, but there are colors that we should not wear.
And unless we're all the same shade of, and I'm just going to use purple.
But there's also the assumption that if you are that shade of purple, you have the same cultural and religious values as the other person who's that shade of purple.
Yeah, that's where the word
and that your insides are the same. That you can eat all the same things.
Because it's like, the I don't see color means I just assume everyone is like me and I'm the normal. It's totally white-centering supremacist.
Yeah.
I don't think it always has to be, though. I mean, I think that if I'm going to presuppose, I'm going to walk in the room and say, okay, you're a black man, therefore I'm going to just say you're a black man, therefore, I mean, it creates a separation, right?
But there
if I'm going to
is a
start with
separation.
that, well,
There
why
is
does
a
there have to be?
separation because he's a black man. He's going to go to the hotel and wonder whether or not somebody's going to treat him like he's the valet. And
Yeah.
it is a thing that every black person living in whiteness has experienced. It is a
People
thing
getting
that
treated
he's
like
experienced
hell.
that white people will not.
I mean, so the thing about it is that these are these visual differences, and we might think that they should not be, differences. Oh, well, people are all the same. But in fact, people's culture is different. And I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with acknowledging the fact that people around the world have different cultures. Right?
Sure.
But
so here's the thing, okay? Because you see a black man in the room, you cannot assume anything about the way he speaks,
yep.
the way he, what cultural knowledge he has, his level of education, his tastes in food. There are many, many, many things that you can't assume. It's true.
Well, I can't assume
But
that
the
about
things that
another
are
white man
about-
in the room either.
But stop. What I'm trying to say is the things that are about his blackness, all right? His taste in food is not about his blackness.
Sure.
His experience of being a black person in a white assuming culture is inextricably part of his blackness right now. And this is the problem that we get into, is that we muddle the difference between the fact that when I talk to women who look like me, who are primarily people of East Asian descent or Southeast Asian descent, we have a shared racialized experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that term specifically now so that it's very clear that this is about the thing that is imposed on us as opposed to what is intrinsic to us.
Right.
So this isn't like the fact that if you're of African descent, you might have a tendency towards sickle cell, or that if you're Ashkenazi, you might have a tendency genetically toward Tay-Sachs.
Right.
That's an intrinsic thing. But as an extrinsic thing, as a thing societally imposed, there is a commonality. And the thing that white people don't acknowledge is that because of whiteness, there are things that are common experiences that have to do with being centered and not experiencing the racialization.
Right. So, I mean, yeah.
So that gets called out as racist.
No default. It would be very nice.
Right.
But in fact, that's not how things operate on a daily basis. and because, yeah, it's funny because when this is an area in which people's different life experiences have large scale patterns that, we don't typically tend to say, well, I refuse to acknowledge that somebody else in the world might have a different experience from me. On the other hand, when it comes to these kinds of divisions, and it's not just race, though race is obviously one of the big ones, because we are never in that environment where we're having those experiences, it becomes this thing where, people will say, well, I deny that ever goes on. Well, but it does.
Right. So the analogy I like to bring up when I have these things, because I do talk about this in lecture and workshop, is that the distinction between the life experience of someone who's short and somebody who's tall isn't questioned.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, I'm just going to assume that you're taller than I am. I'm 5'2". And I'm making that assumption because most men in this culture aren't 5'2". Even men among my own ethnic background aren't normally 5'2". Mm-hmm. In my own culture, I am not short. In this culture, I am notably short. And what that means is that I often can't reach things. Mm-hmm. I have a child's experience in many environments because an adult is expected to be bigger than I am.
Right.
At least in height. And so, but if I say that I assume when I see someone else short that they have the same experiences as me, I'm not being shortest or heightest. I'm just talking about a reality of life.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you know, the fact that I'm short doesn't tell you anything except for the fact that I often have to have my pants hemmed, that when I'm sitting in chairs, I often can't reach the ground with my feet, that I have trouble reaching things out of high places, that airline seats are not nearly as crowded for me as they would be for somebody who's 6'4".
Yeah.
I mean, these are external realities. They are not about whether what kind of music I like, or what languages I speak, or what foods I enjoy, or even whether I'm allergic to a food or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so the experience of being a black man in the US or in Canada or pretty much anywhere in the world where whiteness is dominant is that they are treated differently than if they were white. And saying that's a truism isn't racist. That's an observation of lived experience.
Yeah. And I think women are treated differently from men. That's pretty self-evident across lots and lots and lots of contexts. And it's part of a whole pattern of things. It's not, it's things that people do. It's things that people say. It's also things people do not do, and people think things that people do not say. Right.
And also that a white woman will get treated differently than a not white woman, and that different kinds of not whiteness get treated differently. And then let's go back to the really taboo topic in America, which is that, yes, indeed, it does matter what apparent social class you are displaying.
Mm-hmm.
And we define those things by accent and by posture and by how good are your teeth and all these other things. I mean, it's really fascinating if you look at the rest of the world that Americans are obsessed with having white glossy teeth.
Oh yeah, the tooth thing is really noticeable. Really, really, really noticeable when you come from another culture to America. You guys, seriously, you guys are obsessed.
I'm not going to deny it.
I mean, and it's because of a couple different things. One of which is we're very smiley.
Yeah.
And when we smile, we expose our teeth. And we know absolutely, totally that socioeconomically, good access to good dental care is a socioeconomic marker. And that's the taboo part. We don't include dental in our insurance. We don't even include dental in the insurance for impoverished people.
Yeah.
And why? Honestly, I've come to believe that it's so that we can maintain our taboo socioeconomic marker. And it's also a marker of immigrants. And so I am watching people around me who are immigrants who have now enough financial capital and the wherewithal and the patience, and they are all going out and getting braces so that they can join American society at a level that is expected of them. And, you know, teeth veneers are very, very common, for instance, in Southern California, not so much around me here, but I see adults with braces in a way that I didn't used to when I was younger. And it's an effort of people who are otherwise marginalized to erase that class marker.
And there is a lot of pressure put on. I changed dentists recently because of insurance issues, and the new dentist was all about going like, oh, and then we'll need to correct this, and we'll need to cover that, and we'll need to move these, and we need to cap those. It was like, you know, loads and loads and loads of work that's nothing to do with the health of my teeth and everything to do with how that makes me look within American society. And I'm like, I don't want to spend a fortune on, you know, just doing these things. I'm way more self-conscious about my teeth, which are not great, than I was when I was in England. It's really
right. I mean, there are other things. There are certainly other things that we don't talk about, like the fact that everybody seems to think that advertising pressures that create needs that you really didn't have are totally, you know, fine. Mm-hmm. Like we don't talk about how much pressure everybody's under to buy things and do things, and I mean it's all part of the same like it all weaves together in the end, right? A lot of these things are really interrelated. So.
Well, I mean, body odor taboos, right?
Mm-hmm.
They vary greatly from culture to culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also really apparent what's normalized and what's not. There's a certain amount of stink that's accepted, a certain amount that's considered completely terrible. And how that affects what we're allowed to eat.
Onions.
Sorry, what did you say? Eat?
Yeah.
Eat.
Okay.
I experienced this the other day. I actually noticed, I mean, normally it's really hard for you to notice if your own breath is bad. But I noticed the other day I'd had something for lunch and I was sitting in the cinema afterwards and I was like, oh crap, my breath is terrible. I can smell my own breath. It's awful. And it's like, I just wanted to make sure that I was nowhere near anybody else in the cinema because I felt so self-conscious.
Interesting, yeah, because I see that kind of ebbs and flows, I think, right? I mean, there was a period of time when those ads about underarm odor were like everywhere. And I was being enforced on like constantly. Like I think when you start being a teen is when you start actually getting these messages directly. Maybe that's what it is.
One of the things advertising will do is it will create a social culture. And once it's done that, it's not anything like is necessary. The whole thing about using soap and washing every day and stuff came around probably late Victorian times, was when you had just tons of soap adverts everywhere. Everywhere you look in Victorian times, there's these soap adverts, Pears soap, and there's all these, and it socialized the use of soap. And everyone used it. And after that, you didn't have to advertise soap to anything like the same degree because everyone was already buying it. All you had to do was make sure they recognize your product. A lot of advertising initially creates a demand for a concept, and thereafter it's simply about, oh, everyone's going to use this product. What we need to do is simply make sure that they recognize our name so they're likely to pull it off a shelf compared to somebody that they don't recognize. Because that's broadly how a lot of advertising works. They're not selling you the stuff directly. What they're doing is making damn sure that you can never forget that thing. When you see that product on a shelf, you go like, oh yeah, I'll pick that because I recognize the name, I remember the name.
Yeah, so I was going to pick up something here from the sidebar. Humor is all about skirting boundaries, and we've talked about this on the show a few times. So definitely taboo is where humor is kind of skirting around the edges, and depends on who you are, where your edges lie, and whether you're ready to accept something as humorous or as taboo directly. So it's definitely an interesting thing.
It's one of the things that people who are engaged in social justice get accused of constantly.
Yes, you have no sense of humor.
Humorless, but it's really about the fact that people trying to enforce taboos that weren't there before also creates a huge amount of pushback. Assumptions of what is and isn't taboo is a major way that the greater social organism regulates its immune system.
We haven't talked a whole great deal about doing things in fiction. But anytime you have a multicultural society, you're going to have conflicts between what people consider to be appropriate and inappropriate and taboos of various varieties. And there may be some overlap, but it's hard to tell. So that is definitely a thing that can happen.
What's interesting in doing this from a world building perspective is to, of course, have aliens that have sacred things that we consider completely anathema and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Burial rituals and how you dispose of the dead. We have a lot of variation in human cultures that we don't acknowledge, but I've seen, I don't know if Marianne's story on this has been published or not. She had a culture where the funerary practice was a thing that would be normally considered revolting to humans. I don't know that I want to give any more spoilers to that or not. I wish I could remember the title of the story. I just told you to go read it. That this is for people watching. This is Marianne Mohanraj in her Known Worlds series, of which the short stories are scattered all over the science fiction short fiction publication verse.
I was going to mention The Language of Knives by Haralambie Markov. Dead person is basically baked into a cake.
There you go. Yeah, we have cultures where it's quite ordinary to have grandpa sitting in a corner, not as cremains, but in corpus. So,
yeah,
it was something else. It'll come back to me.
This is a big topic. We are at the end of our hour already. But this has been really cool. So thank you all for being here. This makes me think we need to talk about this again. Maybe what we need to do is come back to it again and really take it on from a world building fiction perspective. Interesting extension of the topic.
Also, there's a possibility of doing it as smaller, more subdivided taboos, like specifically food taboos or taboos or things like that.
Yeah.
I think it was a good idea to start from the beginnings, like right where you started with like definition, because I think you kind of need to know where taboos originate and their purpose in order to be able to apply them intelligently to your fictional world.
Yeah, well, I think it was good that we started by looking at origins, and then we talked about the sort of taboo expanded universe, right? Because it's actually a very huge and very complex expanded universe, and so I'm really glad that we were able to start small and really blow out into a lot of things, and particularly a lot of things that, because they are taboo and we don't talk about them, we almost don't realize that they are taboo. So I appreciate all of your contributions, and I hope we can come back to this topic again soon. I want to let you know, though, that we have a guest on the show next week. Monica Valentinelli will be here to talk about her work in fiction and comics and such.
Awesome.
And I'm really looking forward to talking with her, and I hope you guys can make it. So
yay!
Yay! And I will stop the broadcast.